All right, today we're going to talk about a disease that has been a shadow hanging over humanity for centuries. It's an infection that's famous for being a master of disguise. It can look like a dozen other things, and most dangerously, it can just disappear, only to come back later with absolutely devastating effects. We're talking about syphilis. So that brings up a really interesting question, right? How can a disease be so dangerous, yet at the same time hide in plain sight? Well, that's the whole paradox of syphilis. It's an illness that can fly under the radar for years, sometimes even decades, all while it's silently causing damage inside the body.
So what is it really? At its core, syphilis is a bacterial infection. The culprit is this spiral-shaped little guy called Treponema pallidum. And it's a systemic infection, which means once it gets into your body, it doesn't just hang out in one spot. Nope. It can travel to literally any organ, from your skin all the way to your brain. This is why it earned the nickname the Great Imitator, because its symptoms can look like so many other illnesses.
Okay, so how do you get it? Well, the main way it spreads is through direct contact with a syphilis sore, which is called a chancre. But that's not the only way. It can also be passed from a mother to her child, either while the baby is in the womb or during birth. And, though it's pretty rare these days because of blood screening, it can also be transmitted through contaminated blood products. The disease actually moves through these really distinct stages. So let's start at the beginning, with the first signs, the stuff you can actually see when you first get infected. So after an initial sore, which is often totally painless and just goes away on its own, the infection moves into its secondary stage. And one of the classic signs of that stage is a widespread rash, just like the one you're seeing here. At this point, the bacteria are basically having a party. They're multiplying like crazy and spreading all through the body, which makes the disease extremely infectious. But then, something really sneaky happens. The rash and the other symptoms, they just go away, even if you don't get treatment. And this leads us to the most dangerous phase of the whole disease, the silent stage.
And this is absolutely the most crucial part to understand. The person feels totally fine. There are no signs, no symptoms, nothing to tell them that something is wrong. It gives this completely false sense of security. But the whole time, the bacteria are still there, quietly doing damage to internal organs. It is, for all intents and purposes, a ticking clock.
Now, this silent or latent stage is broken down into two parts. You've got early latent, which is within the first year of being infected. And during this time, a person can still pass the infection to others. After that first year, it becomes late latent syphilis. The risk of spreading it drops way down, but that internal damage, it just keeps on going, year after year. So what happens if the infection is just left alone through that whole silent stage? Well, it can eventually come roaring back, years or even decades later, in its most destructive form. And this is the reckoning. Now, it's really important to point out that not everybody who has untreated syphilis will get to this final tertiary stage. It actually happens in a smaller number of people who either don't get treated at all or don't get the right treatment. But, and this is a big but, for the people who do reach this point, the consequences are nothing short of catastrophic. This image right here shows you the kind of severe damage we're talking about. These destructive lesions are called gummas. They're these large, kind of rubbery sores that can show up on the skin, in your bones, and even on your internal organs. They're basically these big clumps of inflammatory cells that the body builds around the bacteria, and they can literally eat away at healthy tissue. The damage in this late stage can be incredibly widespread. So beyond those destructive gummas, the infection can attack the central nervous system. That's called neurosyphilis, and it can lead to things like paralysis, dementia, and blindness. The bacteria can also go after the cardiovascular system, causing serious damage to the heart and major blood vessels like the aorta. But the impact of syphilis isn't just limited to the person who's infected. It actually poses this profound threat that can literally cross generations. And this is probably one of the most tragic aspects of the entire disease. An infected mother can pass the bacterium to her fetus during pregnancy. This is what's known as congenital syphilis, and it can have absolutely devastating effects on a developing child. Take a look at this image. This shows one of the telltale, permanent signs of congenital syphilis. These are called Hutchinson's teeth. See how they're smaller, they're more widely spaced, and they've got those distinctive notches on the edges?
This is irreversible damage that a child will have to live with for their entire life. And that's not all. Other permanent physical signs include a flattened saddle nose, a prominent forehead that's known as frontal bossing, and bowed shins. These are all irreversible deformities, and they're a really stark reminder of just how important prenatal care and screening is. There's another really critical public health angle that we have to talk about, and that's the dangerous relationship between syphilis and another major infectious disease, HIV. Here's the key takeaway. The open sores that syphilis causes basically act as open doors for HIV. These ulcers make it much, much easier for a person to get HIV if they're exposed, and to transmit HIV to a partner if they're already living with the virus. The two diseases end up fueling each other, making both infections more severe. So after hearing all of this, the big question is, how in the world do you find this hidden disease? Well, the good news is we actually have very effective ways to diagnose it. Diagnosis comes down to lab tests. In the really early stages, doctors can sometimes use a special kind of microscope to literally see the bacteria from a sore. But usually, it's diagnosed with blood tests. And there are two main types. There are screening tests, which look for antibodies your body makes to fight the infection. And then there are more specific tests that confirm the diagnosis by looking for antibodies that target the bacterium itself. And all of this brings us to our final thought. Syphilis is a master of disguise. Its ability to just fade away into a symptom-free phase is exactly what makes it so dangerous and allows it to cause so much damage completely unnoticed. So this leaves us with a pretty critical question. If the signs can just disappear, how do we fight a hidden enemy? The answer, it turns out, isn't just in medicine. It's in knowledge. It lies in awareness, in regular screening, and in understanding that even when the signs are gone, the threat can still be very, very real.